Yeah, so we're having a lot of intermissions, Richard. Sorry about that.
Yeah. You're going to have to cut some pace, don't you?
Don't ask me to do that. That is an impossibility. Let's get on to the touring side of it because, you know, like a lot of artists, they had these buses going around the States and they did one night stands here, there, and everywhere. They're very friendly with Buddy Holly, I believe, particularly Phil.
Yeah, I've looked at this, and it's interesting how those southern guys from they toured together, they became really good friends, and they helped each other.
Yeah.
So Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers were close. They wrote songs for each other. They advised each other. They weren't competitive. No. It wasn't about who's getting the most. And of course, I mean, it was dangerous in those days. Well, we know what happened to Buddy Holly, but they were in these fairly ramshackle buses, being driven by their managers. I don't mean driving the bus. I mean being driven hard by their managers from, you know, one night after night after night, having to do one-stop shows.
Yeah.
And Roy Orbison was involved with them as well. Roy Orbison, because he was from Texas, as Buddy Holly was.
Yeah.
So I mean, Roy Orbison wrote Claudette for them, and that was another hit later on for the Everlys. So there was quite a lot of crossover of writing for each other and sharing each other's songs. So yeah, I think being involved together on these grand tours. Buddy Holly toured. Chuck Berry toured with them as well.
Yeah,
and, you know, they got to know each other.
Yeah, didn't he also have a punch up with Jerry Lee Lewis on one occasion?
Most people had a punch up with Jerry Lee Lewis, I think.
Yeah. So that was, you know, one of those things that happened. Unfortunately, all of these guys, because of the fact that they were put under so much pressure, took to waking up drugs, making me go to sleep drugs and everything else. These managers really worked them hard, didn't they?
They did. I think it was only as they became successful as 18 or 19-year-old lads. It was when they became older and more experienced, they realised just what was happening and how they were being taken for everything they earned, really, and how basically they were just getting crumbs. And I mean, they loved playing music, and that was their joy. But suddenly they realised just how much money was being made by third parties, usually their managers. Or quite often the record promoters. Alan Freed put his name on other people's songs and took the royalties, for example. And often, so there were lots of people fleecing these young lads in the 50s and the 60s. It wasn't until they actually started to grow up themselves and take control of their own careers, you could actually start to make real money. Quite often they were broke.
And of course, talking about Freed, you had that payola scandal, didn't you?
Yes.
Where essentially he was being paid by the record companies, presumably, to actually plug certain records and this sort of thing. Big stink over that.
Exactly. I mean, that was just to, exactly what you said. That's what payola was.
Yeah.
And I think a number of people went to prison as a result of that, the unraveling of that. Yeah. That was just to promote records, get them into the charts, and it basically promotes the artists. But it was all about getting your records played in those days.
We get on now to 1960. Warner Brothers, the movie studio, is on the verge of financial collapse. They've set up a record company. They signed the Everlys, and allegedly the Everlys saved the company, the whole thing.
Well, I think potentially they did. I mean, I don't know the full story of the corporate decline of Warner Brothers, but certainly it was a fantastic move, because that was almost the first. I'm younger than the Everly Brothers, born about more than a decade later. But that was almost the first Everly Brothers record I recognised was Cathy's Clown, which was on Warner Brothers.
Yeah,
I didn't. It wasn't until later, until the Beatles came along, that I actually heard some of their earlier records, like "Bye Bye Love" and "All I Have to Dream," "Wake Up Little Susie." So yeah, Cathy's Clown was the first Everly Brothers, and that, of course, was written by the Everly Brothers, I think.
Yes, that's right.
I'm trying to check it, but I'm pretty sure it was. I think it was one of Don's, and that was one of their biggest hits. It had on the back a really sort of depressing song. I think it was called Ebony Eyes, which was about
Oh yes,
a
the
plane
crash.
Oh, yeah, which for a 10-year-old wasn't really very cheerful, you know.
No,
Kathy's Clown again had lovely harmonies,
Yeah.
and had, again, it was that example of Don singing the solo in the middle, at a slightly different pitch, which rang like a bell. It was a beautiful solo. Again, I mean, I wouldn't have known who they were at that time. As I said, I was about 10 years old then. But I do remember that solo that comes in the middle of Kathy's Clown.
Yeah. And the drum work was brilliant.
Yes,
it wasn't,
of course, yes.
It wasn't just a sort of fall to the bar bit, you know.
No,
and it sold 8 million records.
8 million?
Yes.
I mean, these days, 8 million is staggering.
Well,
I mean, there would have been a lot of return for Warner Brothers there.
Yeah. Hence the fact that, you know, some people say that Warner Brothers, you know, solvency was dependent upon the Everly Brothers. Who knows? Yeah.
It'd be
anyway,
interesting. I'll just say something about, because, you know, you mentioned drums. They had these extraordinary black guitars that nobody else had, that Gibson made for them. I don't like them very much, to be honest. They look huge and bulky when they're trying to play them and sing together. But they were unique and very much an Everly Brothers trademark. Must be worth a few bob if they went to auction, I would think. Well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but a British guitarist called Albert Lee, you may have heard of him.
Well, he played with them a lot, didn't he?
Well, he played with them a lot, and he was the guy who brought them back together in '83, which we'll get to in a minute. But he has Don's black guitar, right? And Don's manager wanted to buy it off him, and he won't buy it. He won't sell it. Don gave it to Albert Lee, but we'll come to that in a minute. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, as we were saying earlier, inevitably problems with management with Wesley Rose. They eventually get rid of him. I don't know how much it costs to get rid of him. Hate the thing. I don't, but I've heard how it always cost a huge amount to get out of these contracts. They also had to enlist into the Marines because of conscription. The haircuts are quite interesting, weren't they? Well, that's just what I was going to say. You know, you see them with these great bouffant hairstyles, and then you see them coming out and doing this. Yes, absolutely. And you know, just a buzz cut. And very different. But I mean, good for them. Yeah, they did their service, their national service. Yeah, very together. Much so. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think they went into action, but nonetheless they did their national. No, well, they were there in case, weren't they? You know, very much so. Just missed the Vietnam War, I suspect. So, inevitably, they fall out with one another. All brothers do this, don't they? Absolutely, you took the words out of my mouth. It is extraordinary. I mean, the number of I was looking at the brothers. So you've got who the brothers who've appeared together. So you've got the Kinks. Dave and Ray Davis, you know, they fell out big time, and never really got on. I mean, they're one example. These are others. You've got Mark Knopfler and Dave Knopfler, who formed the Dire Straits together. You've of course got the famous Gallagher brothers from Oasis. It seems to work for a while. And then, I mean, it's just sibling rivalry, isn't it? You know, I guess so. Boys, and I guess, as I tried to hint earlier, there is usually one dominant partner, one who is providing more creativity. I think probably you could say that Ray Davis, for example, was the more dominant partner in the Kinks. Mark Knopfler was more dominant in Dire Straits. I think they had creative tensions as well. Yeah. And the Gallagher brothers, they had completely different roles in Oasis. Noel played the guitar, Liam was stroppy. Yeah. So it works for a bit, and then it does seem to cause huge tensions. Yeah. And of course, with the Everleys, it worked for quite a long time before they fell out with one another. But you hinted earlier that they were on amphetamine drugs. Yeah. They were boozing. Yeah. Phil smoking. Phil smoking very heavily, which ultimately killed him later. Yeah. And also, as as one only sort of latterly realised, they had very, very different political philosophies.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, and I think that only became evident probably after Phil had died. But their philosophy was very different of life.
Yeah. Just for the purposes of clarification, Phil was the Republican and Don was the Democrat. And
I think I get a sense that Phil was sort of on the Ronald Reagan Trump side of the Republicans, and Don was on the fairly sort of
lefty
left of the Democratic Party. So I think they were a long way apart.
Yeah. They did several solo albums that, on their own, which I suppose sold, but not in great amounts. Phil partnered up with Cliff Richard.
Yes. Yeah, for a bit. Yeah. The other thing I think that I hadn't again properly realized, the Everleys themselves lost a lot of popularity around sort of in the Beatles area in the States, but they remained very popular in the UK prior to their breakup.
Yeah.
So they had a stronger following in the UK, which probably explains the Phil Everly Cliff Richard link. Well after they had sort of disappeared from view in the States. But then came the breakup.
Yeah, and of course the reunion took place in the UK, didn't it?
Well, now we come to that. So they effectively broke up, I think, around in the 70s, in the early 70s. And then this guy, Albert Lee, who was a very, very talented guitarist.
Yeah.
He played, I guess, as a session man for lots and lots of famous.
Yeah.
But he was also in a group himself, and which was well known. But he was a virtuoso guitarist, but he was in a group you may have heard of called Heads, Hands and Feet.
Yeah.
Which was a live band they played on the Old Grey Whistle Test. But he brought them together for this Albert Hall concert. Where he played lead guitar behind them playing the rhythm guitar, and it was interesting. I mean, it was an amazing an occasion. But they came on, and of course I remember them from being slim young men with move-on hairstyles and so on, chiseled jawline. And Don in particular was a rather rotund gentleman.
He was indeed, yes. Yeah.
Phil himself, as a result of the smoking, looked fairly lined and haggard, but they could still do it. They could still sing it. And I mean, it's been on the TV many times, that Albert Hall concert, and it's uplifting.
I found it incredibly emotional, the whole thing, because a lot of the songs that they were singing weren't necessarily love songs about third parties. They were actually pushing them into themselves.
Yes, they were.
Devoted to You, for example, being a good number. That you could actually see them looking at one another.
You could see the emotion.
And you could almost, you think, oh, you're only a few seconds from tears.
Took words out of my mouth again. I think they were very, very emotional throughout that. As was the audience, of course.
Very much so.
I mean, good on Albert Lee for bringing them together. He was the producer of that. Yeah. And he stayed with him for 20 years.
Yeah, because it turned out into world tours and all sorts of things, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. But, as you say, if he hadn't have actually been there to act as the catalyst in the first place.
Yeah.
And, we saw them on a couple of occasions after the reunion. I think once at Wembley and once at Hammersmith Odeon, now known as Hammersmith Apollo. And they were really good. It was a super show. It was a super show. Yeah.
They had retained their voices. I think as a result of the smoking, Phil's voice had got deeper. Yeah. But they could still do the harmonies. And the guitar work was good. I mean, the guitar, as I said earlier, Don did the characteristic riffs and the solos, but they were still musicians, not just singers. What you hear in terms of the guitar work in all of their songs is them. I talked about Albert Lee playing lead, but basically the characteristic sound of the Everly Brothers is the sound they make on their guitars. Yeah, they aren't dependent on a backing group.
Part of the promotion was the fact that they had that song "On the Wings of a Nightingale," which was written by Paul McCartney specifically for them. Yeah. So he was obviously quite keen to see them back in harness.
And that was their last hit, I think, wasn't it, Tony?
Yeah.
And that it's great that they had a late career hit, but I mean, so many of these of the superstars that came along after them, like the Stones. Keith Richards pays tribute to the Stones, the Beatles, who you've mentioned, the Hollies, and many of the groups in the States, and we've mentioned Simon and Garfunkel, do pay tribute to these early pioneers. They recognise the influence they had, whether it's Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley. They all influenced what my generation, our generation, who are younger than these, see as, if you like, the seminal moment for popular music, which was the mid-60s, the Beatles and so on. But actually, these guys who came before, who sort of suffered in their careers as a result of the beat boom of the 60s, they were hugely influential in what came after, and still are. I think for me, the other thing is that some of these guys, and the Everly Brothers are classics, their music will live for a long while because it is beautiful. I mean, it's popular music, it's not classical music, but it still has a resonance and still is played. Whereas some of the music, like heavy metal and those sort of things, you don't hear that played now. It had its time, and it doesn't carry through.
Yeah, virtually everything.
Buddy Holly do. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say virtually everything has a sort of 2 or 3 year phase, doesn't it? Punk, new wave. You know, you can, and it's all about record companies marketing as much as anything, isn't it? You know, it's not for the benefit of the consumer or the artist.
But it neither influences long-term popular music, nor does it have a long-term life, in as much as you go back to it and it's popular and it's still played 60 years later. But this is, Buddy Holly is, Chuck Berry is, Elvis Presley is, because it was good music at the time.
Yeah, that's
they
right.
were good musicians. And they had good voices, of course.
So how would you sum them up then?
Well, I think the greatest harmony duo in popular music
ever,
and without parallel, nobody's touched them. Great interpreters of other people's songs, latterly great writers of their own songs, and hugely influential on those who came after them, and if you like, icons of mid and late 1950s popular music, which transformed young people's political ideas, young people's lives, and was the backdrop to people like you and I, all of our lives. And musicians, a level of musicianship and singing that will resonate for many years, and will still be played for many years, and will always be influential, as we were sort of suggesting just now.
Richard, as ever, a great pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And I mean, it's good to talk about them, and you know, as far as they're concerned, I couldn't agree more with everything you've said. So there, see you soon.
See you, Tony. Thank you very much. Bye for now.